partition of Korea from Japan, the resolution said that there was only one lawful government on the Korean Peninsula, and that was the Republic of Korea. And the world agreed to that position for many years, and then for political reasons they did not foresee the disaster that North Korea would become. In the early 1990s, the UN accepted DPRK and ROK in its membership. But it seems to me that in 2016, the behavior of the so-called DPRK is such that the UN needs to go back to its unfinished task of having one Korea that is united and independent.
Thank you, Grace. Joe?
Yeah, J.J. Janis, American Renaissance Oil and Gas. Regarding Larry's proposal to use a stick to use against North Korea's oil, which is located next to Manchuria, which is located next to some of the largest oil wells and gas wells with fracking, and North Korea being loaded with natural minerals. The other idea would be better, would be Peter, and I wanted to get an idea on that, using green energy to propose, because oil and gas is going to be very plentiful. They're fracking everywhere now, even in Saudi Arabia. That's not going to be a stick in the future. That's World War II thing that started the war in Japan. His idea is a lot better, and where we can use the sciences combined, because they can, once they start to frack over, they can do their own oil. So just want to get a view on that.
Thank you, Joe.
Instead of a stick, I think a carrot.
Thank you. Yeah, sure.
I see Professor Schonfeld's here, so I'll try to be
Yes.
brief. You had me except for the ping pong diplomacy piece, because ping pong diplomacy was obviously aimed at brokering a larger entente between the U.S. and China, and that's not where we're going. Where I would, but I agree with part of your premise of your point, which is I think, and I've always thought that we should be prepared, we the U.S., Japan, okay, the West, we should be prepared to provide humanitarian assistance to the North Korean people, regardless of what the regime is doing, as long as we can monitor it and be confident up to a certain percentage, it's never going to be 100%, that it's getting to the people, and we should consistently say that. President Bush was pretty adamant about this, and we've lost that in the Clinton administration as well. Aid was timed with diplomacy. So if there were a way to decouple humanitarian aid, which could include vaccines, things like that for the North Korean people, or cultural exchanges, things like that, to decouple that from diplomacy completely and just provide it for the North Korean people, that'd be good. I'd be cautious about cultural exchanges because, as we found with the New York Philharmonic going, these are all used as propaganda tools to demonstrate the U.S. is paying homage or tributary to the great.
And it's a one-off with no legs.
I wouldn't do that, but I certainly would encourage, if there's a way to get North Koreans, I don't think there is, but if there's a way to get North Korean students to China, to talk to students around the world, that kind of thing, absolutely. Humanitarian relief, if we can, primarily through the World Food Program, but with strict monitoring, we should do that. We shouldn't punish the North Korean people and make that clear. Especially, my segue, if we go to Grace's interesting idea, really interesting idea, about one Korea. I'm very sympathetic to that idea. I like it. If I were in government, how would you do that? I don't think the next administration can just leap to a unification or one Korea. Well, we kind of have a one Korea policy actually, but we couldn't leap to a unification policy in the sense that we're giving up on the nuclear diplomacy completely, and we're giving up on North Korea, where now our policy is unification. I don't think it'd be credible. It would look petulant and kind of frustrated. So I was thinking, how would you do that in declaratory policy? And for too long, our declaratory policy has been, North Korea has two paths. It can, visibly give up, CVID, completely verifiably and irreversibly dismantle its nuclear programs or move in that direction, or it will be further isolated. And all too often when North Korea does a test, our response, both administrations, has been to say, North Korea is just isolating itself. Yeah, I don't think that bothers Kim Jong-un in the least. So I would look at some declaratory policy that would anticipate what you're saying. The ideal combination would be a sort of global NGO effort to do what you're saying, and and then a US government declaratory policy adopted by our friends and allies that says there are two paths. One path would be verifiable semantic nuclear weapons. The other path is not isolation. It's a global commitment to unification under the South. And start making that the declaratory policy for a while. I don't think it'd be credible to say, well, nuclear diplomacy didn't work, so now our policy is unification, because you'd be asked, well, yeah, how are you going to do that? That's how I sort of get in that direction. Fracking in China and Manchuria, I mean, my understanding is fracking takes a lot of water, and over the coming decades, China's going to have a serious water crisis. I'd be interested in learning more about it. Bottom line is, I don't think we should be helping North Korea with its power grid or anything else that the regime can use to sustain its legitimacy. And so I'm not sure if I understood the proposal exactly, but I'd be very, very cautious about that. Unless it can be done in a humanitarian way, maybe even a local way, maybe also under UN food program somehow where you're doing something for cultivation of crops or something like that. But anything that goes through the regime now, I'd be very, very cautious about.
Well, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Let's give Mike.
For whom the bell tolls.
Yeah. And this is next time I will play something.
Make Korea great again.
Oh, thank you. Okay, this is part of our.
Great, thank you.
Thank you very much. I thank you.
Clean up for.
Now, our next. Okay. This is very excellent. Professor David Shamba is probably one of the most distinguished scholar on China program. In fact, my Chinese colleague in Chongqing told me so about a week ago. Apparently you were there. And,
No, I didn't go to that meeting. I know the meeting.
good, the meeting, okay. My friend is based in Chongqing, and he told me that whenever Professor Shamba shows up in China, Beijing government listens. That's what I was told. Now, the floor is yours, and okay, you can stand here.
Okay. Well, I'm glad, I know everybody came to hear my friend and colleague, Michael Green. He's always good value, but I appreciate some of you sticking around for my part of the conference today. You have an excellent program. I want to congratulate the organizers and thank Dr. Kim for the invitation to speak to the ICAS Fall Symposium. My first time speaking to ICAS and my first time in the Heritage Foundation building, I have to confess. It's a pleasure to be here in both cases.
Thank you.
My assigned title, assigned to me, was U.S.-China Relations and the Dynamics of East Asia, which is what you have in your program. But because the symposium is focused on Korean Peninsula issues, when I was looking over the schedule a few days ago, I realized that my topic, U.S.-China Relations and Dynamics of East Asia, was really an outlier to all the other topics. This seems to be a very Korea-focused conference. So I thought I would try and orient my remarks really more towards your interests with regard to Korea. So you're not going to hear me speak about China, Southeast Asia, this and that. I am going to say a bit about China's Asia strategy as I see it and where Korea fits into that. So I think that's the place to start. If you're going to understand how the Chinese think about the Korean Peninsula, both north and south, one has to begin, I think, with a understanding of how they think about the region broadly. So let me begin with a few observations about that, and then move more specifically to how I understand. Mind you, I have no great insights. The Chinese, your friend in Chongqing, I appreciate that, and the Chinese government, I'm not sure they want my insights, but at any rate, I am an American. I try and watch China. So, you know, what I'm going to put forward to you are my own views. I'm certainly not here to represent the Chinese government nor their perspective, but to try and unpack and understand a little bit about how they come to thinking about the Korean Peninsula. It's not a subject, China and Korea, on which I have spent much of my professional career. In fact, I've published precisely one article out of 200 plus in my life on China and Korea. So it's not something I specialize in, but I just wanted to be kind of friendly to the organizers and try and prepare some remarks that would be of interest to those of you that follow the Korean Peninsula more than I do. Okay, so I think the starting place is indeed to try and get some sense of how the Chinese view their region and their role in the region. So, you know, if there was a secret document in the Junnan Hai that elaborated how they view their regional strategy, what would the elements of that document be? These are my guesses, but first I think we have to understand that the Chinese bring some considerable historical perspective to bear on their perspectives on the region today in the 21st century. That is to say, the assumptions of what Western scholars call the tribute system are operative, psychologically operative in Chinese thinking about their periphery. So let's just remind ourselves, that's not to say they're trying to recreate a 21st century version of the tribute system. There are some scholars out there, such as David Kong at University of Southern California, who's written a very good book, several articles. There are scholars who think that's exactly what the Chinese are trying to do, is to replicate the pre-Qing dynasty tribute system. I'm not so sure about that myself, but I would submit to you that there are some assumptions that flow from their 3,000 plus years of history that are still operative in the way they think about the periphery, the region today. So let's just quickly remind ourselves, how did that so-called tribute system operate? What were the key features of it? First, it was hierarchical, right? And China was at the pinnacle of the hierarchy. And it was, in essence, a patron-client system. It's not a system of equality amongst the member states, nor was it a concert, what today international relations scholars call a concert of powers. It wasn't a concert of powers. It was a hierarchical, hegemonic system. What type of hegemony? Answer, benevolent hegemony, non-coercive hegemony. The Chinese did not rule their periphery through force. It was a non-coercive, as I say, kind of system, and it was essentially a peaceful system. The third element of it, it was a very, today I guess we put this in the soft power category. It was a very deferential and highly ritualistic system. That is to say that the peoples on the periphery of China, and remember most of this was in the pre-nation state era, they paid deference to the Middle Kingdom, to the personification of the Middle Kingdom, namely the emperor himself, and they were rewarded with benefits. But this is a very ritualistic system. They would physically come to the capital bearing gifts of tribute. That's why it's called the tribute system. For the emperor, they would kowtow. They would have to enter the country and approach Beijing in a north-south direction. And they'd kowtow, do the 9 head knockings on the way. And then they would finally get to the emperor's throne and tell him how much they love Chinese culture. And the emperor would say, fine, we will come and sinicize you. You come to China to be sinicized, to be taught the virtues of Chinese culture, ways of doing it, everything from Chinese calendar to other modalities of interaction. So this is a very cultural kind of hegemony, actually. And in return, these peoples on the periphery, received both commercial benefit and today what we would call extended deterrence. So the Chinese would use force to protect their peripheral appendages, you might call them, when there were uprisings and rebellions and help was asked for. So they would go into Vietnam, they would go into Korea, they would go into Taiwan, and put down uprisings. So let's just remind ourselves, that's sort of in the DNA, I think, and in the kind of cognitive mindset of most Chinese when they think about their region today. And as I say, to them, Korea is a subset of that. Second element of China's broad regional strategy is to what I call pacify the periphery. So this is a country, you know where it is on the map, centrally located in Asia, borders 17 other countries, more than any nation on the planet. And this is a country that has had at least a couple thousand years of pressure on its borders, northern borders and eastern borders primarily, but also to some extent southern borders, where foreigners have encroached onto Chinese territory and soil. So this is a nation today that is hyper sensitive about its borders, more than any other country I can think of, because of this history. First it was the nomadic peoples from the Central Asian steppes that invaded, the Mongols as well. Then it was the European colonial powers who sailed up the eastern periphery with their gunboats. And according to Chinese, even Vietnamese encroached upon their southern periphery. So we have to remember that border security is really paramount in the way the Chinese think about their national security.